In the 1970s and 1980s, a wave of horror directors came onto the scene who rewrote the books. Rewrote is the appropriate word because they didn't actually invent from whole cloth. Take John Carpenter, for instance. Assault on Precinct 13 is really a siege movie based on the old cowboy and Indian pics. But what he did is cleverly update it with the modern language of cinema into an incredibly intense experience. Now, that's not quite a horror film under normal definitions of the genre, but it would be impossible not to understand that it evokes those same emotions. So, as far as I'm concerned, it fits in the genre. And certainly, Carpenter built on what he learned from that experience and what he was able to develop as far as style to create his later horror masterpieces. I mentioned John Carpenter because there's a modern figure who's just as important to the genre today as John Carpenter was in the late 70s. And he's largely under the radar in America. Not so in his native India, where he is a superstar horror director. Ashwin Saravanan is a name that every American needs to learn right now. Like the other figures that we've covered in these previous videos about the new wave of horror masters, Ashwin Saravanan comes to the genre at a weird time. The domestic scene, that is, the American scene, is floundering. It doesn't have a clear direction and is relying far too heavy on editing, CGI effects, and cheap jump scares. So what is the really passionate, visionary director who has an interest in the genre to do? Well, you start with a ghost story. His 2015 movie, Maya, is a conventional ghost story on the surface level, which is a common theme for his work of there being multiple levels to his stories, and that density creates an incredible viewing experience. Maya tells two concurrent stories that, in the end, turn out to be the same story told from a different perspective, or informing each other. Now, it does use some of the visual language you'd associate with a ghost story. His innovation is story-driven and mood and atmosphere. He's not trying to reinvent the ghost story wholesale, just as John Carpenter wasn't trying to reinvent the siege story with Assault on Precinct 13. The film never forgets that the emotions on screen need to match the emotions in the audience. And what that means is if a character is feeling a certain way and they're a good enough actor to portray it, the audience should vicariously get those same emotions. That's how great cinema works. If Jamie Lee Curtis had not acted terrified at the end of Halloween, the audience would not have those social cues to make us sympathize by having those same emotions. Sharing the emotional base is what makes the horror film work, and ideas that we can relate to is what makes it intellectually work. You need both. I always say that it's more important to feel a movie than to follow a movie, which is the reason some of those great 1970s and 80s Italian giallos work so well. On a logical level, they don't work, but on an intellectual level, they're not asking you to be rational. They're asking you to open yourself up to the emotional response. Saravanan's work does the same thing, but on a much higher level than we've ever experienced before in the genre. That sounds like hyperbole, doesn't it? However, his second released film, Game Over, didn't only become my favorite film of 2019, it's become one of my favorite films of all time, and for good reasons. A multi-level story that you could best describe as a home invasion thriller is actually a deep meditation on survivor's guilt. It has social impact, it has emotional resonance, and it has characters that you genuinely feel like you know. So, we have a filmmaker with a clear vision of the genre's future, and chops unmatched by any of his peers. So why is it that when I mention Saravanan, or Game Over, or Maya, I tend to get blank stares? Well, there is distribution of his titles in America, but they're streaming. And on those streaming services, they're buried. They do not come up as suggested titles. You have to search for them. And I always ask, how do you know what you don't know? It's important, though, that we seize on this moment to recognize his talent and support his growth within the genre. Because 2 films in, with an asterisk. He has already surpassed many, many of the great figures who've come before him. And although India is a definite thriving metropolis of film, the modern horror experience is new there. In the past, horror was either incredibly cheesy or incredibly exploitative. Having truly literate, smart, modern horror is a new phenomenon for India, and one that needs to be supported. If Ashwin Saravanan represents the possibility in that nation of coming up with work that operates on such a high level, there's no excuse for other countries with much deeper histories inside the genre, such as America, Britain, Italy, Japan, to be operating at a lower level. Now, that's not to say everything that comes out of India and the horror genre is great. There's a lot that's not. But I truly feel that if Ashwin Saravanan can continue his path forward, he will, in short order, become the predominant figure of horror for this new century. Now, I said there was an asterisk before. He's actually made another film, and it's one that has unfortunately not been seen a whole lot. That film is called Iravakulam. It seems to be more of a drama with noir horror undertones. The problem is it's had massive distribution problems owing to the financiers not having the money to release the film or something. The story is not real clear. That film was made between Maya and Game Over. So it's clear that this isn't a case where a director makes a horror film to gain some notoriety and quickly moves away from the field. This is someone who cares. He's also someone who obviously puts heart and mind equally into every project. So, do yourself a favor. If you have free time, and you do, don't just settle for whatever the choices scroll past you on screen. Go into the search box and put the words "Game Over." Use that as a springboard to an entire field of entertainment that you probably have not experienced before, but in particular, use it as a way to find this extraordinary artist who we all need to support. It's a shame that there's not a physical release that you can buy of either of his films, but that doesn't mean the films are unavailable. It takes a little bit more work, but the rewards are huge. This is going to the theater to see Assault on Precinct 13 in the 1970s, or being an early discoverer of David Cronenberg or George Romero. You owe it to yourself not to let nostalgia blind you to the great material that's being made today.